There are still a few blank spots on the map even today. The Chagos Archipelago in the middle of the Indian Ocean is an island paradise and one of the biggest marine conservation areas in the world. It's a refuge for seabirds, fish and corals. An international research team is exploring the island world, underwater and above it. Humans have only lived here for 200 years and have changed nature permanently. But the underwater world is healthier than in many other regions.
This place is unique because it is so untouched. From a scientific perspective, that's really important because this is what the ocean should look like.
Tropical coral reefs are the most species-rich habitats in the sea, but in many places they're subject to heat stress, and researchers are hunting for ways to help the corals. It's a race against time. A seemingly endless expanse of water. No sign of land in any direction. Heather Calderway is a marine biologist. Together with her team, she's investigating one of the most remote coralline archipelagos. Which species are found here and how closely are the islands and the underwater world connected? Many of their questions would be almost impossible to answer anywhere else. For example, how resistant are coral reefs to climate change if they're not also damaged by fishing and pollution? The Chagos Archipelago lies south of the Maldives in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The islands are a British Indian Ocean territory. The ocean is held to be a blue desert, but in fact, there's masses of activity here all the time. Predators follow their prey across the ocean. Giants such as manta rays and whale sharks are always to be found wherever plankton or shoals of small fish are in abundance. A few years ago, scientists even discovered a previously unknown population of blue whales in the Indian Ocean. Weighing anything up to 200 tons, it's the heaviest animal that has ever lived. A discovery that shows how little we know about life in the oceans. The researchers are keen to find out more about biodiversity underwater and use a relatively new technique to do so. They take water samples at different locations. These contain traces of DNA genetic material that come from fish scales, skin remains, or excretions of various animals. And with the help of this environmental DNA, researchers can analyze which species occur in each place.
There's some species that we haven't documented on scuba, but we know are here. So we can compare what we get from the eDNA record from what we get for scuba diving, but also from the historical fisheries record. We know blue sharks are present here. We've never seen one on a scientific dive. We know hammerheads are here. We've seen very few, but we have seen them on other methods, such as baited cameras. So bringing all these together, we can get a real understanding of what the diversity of shark life is here.
The strange shape of the hammerhead shark's head has puzzled researchers for a long time. But it's probably useful for hunting. The sharks have almost perfect all-round vision. They can see what's happening directly in front of them and also what's going on behind them. The ship has been underway for 2 days. Peter Carr is an ornithologist. The birds in the sky indicate that land is nearby. Around 60 islands belong to the Chagos Archipelago. Most of them rise only slightly above sea level. The entire region is now protected as a marine conservation area. It covers an area larger than Germany and England combined. Only the island of Diego Garcia is used by the Americans as a military base. All the other islands are uninhabited. For the scientists, it's a huge open-air laboratory.
This particular region has been fully protected since 2010. But it's been protected for longer than that, particularly because it's so isolated. And that's given it some natural protection for some period of time. Compared to the rest of the ocean, which has been fished, dredged, polluted, where constant development of our coastlines, we're seeing dramatic change and dramatic loss. So this place is unique because it is so untouched, it is so special. From a scientific perspective, that's really important because this is what the ocean should look like. Here is a reference point, a real start, a baseline of what we should be targeting for the recovery of the rest of the ocean.
Even in paradise, there's bad weather, but that doesn't concern the researchers. They're harvesting today, harvesting data. A few years ago, they installed a network of hydrophones, underwater microphones, at various depths below the water surface. These devices have to be regularly replaced.
This receiver is part of a massive listening facility for sharks and other marine animals. It now has valuable data inside that tells scientists exactly who or what has swum by here in the last few months.
The researchers have deployed receivers like this at numerous locations across the archipelago. And on previous expeditions, they've fitted over 100 sharks with tiny transmitters. The procedure only takes a few minutes and doesn't interfere with the animals. The tags function as a kind of acoustic shark ID card. Every time a shark swims past one of the receivers, it's specifically registered. The biologists want to find out how sharks and other predatory fish use the marine sanctuary.
One of the criticisms of large marine protected areas, like the one around the Chagos Archipelago, is that they can't protect mobile pelagic predators. Now, to date, all of the predators that we've tagged with satellite tags, except 2, have stayed within the confines of the MPA. And that's surprising because these animals have the potential to travel vast distances across ocean basins, but they haven't. So while we've tagged relatively low numbers and for short periods of time, the early indications are that this place could be providing a unique spatial refuge.
Commercial fishing is banned throughout the marine protected area, so sharks and other fish should be safe. But even here, 100% protection is not possible. While working, they come across a strange buoy. The scientists have their suspicions and want to take a closer look. Structures in the ocean attract fish, and indeed, there's a tangle of lines and hooks underwater. Fishermen put out fish collectors like this and then come back later to collect the catch. This buoy has probably been lost and floating in the open seas for some time. The divers collect the hooks to prevent any more animals from falling into the trap. Later, they will recover the whole contraption.
For gear like this, they're predominantly targeting predatory fish such as sharks or maybe wahoo or something like that with sharp teeth, because you can see here just above the hook you've got this wire trace which is very tough, and animals like sharks can't bite through it. Since 2010, all fishing has been strictly prohibited inside the Bar MPA. It's a no-take MPA. So the presence of the gear that we found today in the MPA is an illegal fishing gear.
There are still large numbers of sharks and other fish in the marine protected area, which always attracts illegal fishing vessels. The risk of them being caught is relatively small. The whole area is just too big.
We had an event where about 20% of the animals we had tagged that year disappeared. And it was an indication that there had been an illegal fishing event that had come in and poached out those animals. So the array is giving us an opportunity when we're not here to still have an idea about what's happening.
This event happened several years ago. In the meantime, the fish population has recovered. The coral reefs around the Chagos Archipelago are held to be particularly biodiverse. Today, the researchers plan to equip manta rays with transmitters. Drones are the easiest way to locate the animals. They want to know whether the marine conservation area offers enough protection to the large mobile species, such as mantas.
Taylor, right at it. Wait a second, it's about 50 meters away.
Only an experienced team has any chance here. They have to catch the manta before it escapes. This one glanced off.
Taylor, there's a manta on your starboard side, about 50 meters.
The transmitter is attached.
To your port side.
Another try.
Very close to the reef. It's actually on the reef. Yeah, just continue, continue, continue.
It's exhausting work, but well worth the effort.
What's really interesting is the large movements that the manta ray is making. So they spend a good amount of time near some of these atolls like Egmont or Solomon, but they also spend a large amount of their time away from the atolls. So they're doing something out in the pelagic, or the waters offshore a little bit more than many of the other species that we're studying.
Several animals now sport satellite transmitters, so in future, researchers will be able to observe remotely what's happening here. Peter, Uli and Heather are on their way to South Brother, an island that has never been settled by humans. They want to spend the night there to study nature and especially the bird life more closely. An odd-looking bird is the red-footed booby, the only boobies that breed in trees. Its red feet play an important part in its courtship. A bright red is a signal that he is healthy and well-fed. In many regions of the world, seabird populations are declining.
We've found over the last 10 years research that most of the populations are stable, and at least two species, red-footed booby and brown booby, are increasing. And we have monitored them going from island to island, spreading their breeding distribution, and we witnessed colony numbers going up over the last 20 years. That's a great success story.
Most of the birds here have never seen a human being. They're fearless. Peter rings the birds to find out more about their behavior. On the tropical islands, many species have no fixed breeding season. They nest all year round. The exact way of life here has only begun to be studied.
We want to see if they stay on the same islands and in the same areas on those islands. So if we ring them and if we GPS track where the nest is, we can work out whether these birds nest on this island all the time or whether they go to this island and this island. At the moment, our studies have shown birds that are bred on South Brother will breed back on South Brother. They stay here all their life.
Twilight in the tropics is brief. It's dark by 7 o'clock. A few hours later, they start again. At night, the island is alive. Peter wants to find and count the nests of a very special bird. It's a unique experience. As soon as the two get into the forest, they practically fall over the birds. There are sheer waters everywhere, seabirds that breed in burrows in the ground.
I'm really excited to be here tonight on South Brother on the Great Chagos Bank. Why? We get so few opportunities to come on these islands in the Chagos Archipelago at night. That means we know little about the true status and distribution of our two shearwaters here, wedge-tailed shearwater and the range-restricted and much more rare tropical shearwater. We know it occurs on at least 3 islands, but what we don't know is in what abundance it occurs on these islands. So to be able to walk through and measure this area of forest that we're in and work out how many pairs are breeding in certain amounts of these areas, we actually are getting a better idea of the total population on this island.
The young are already a few months old and have left their dens. They're about to fledge. At night, they wait for their parents who spend the days at sea hunting. They only return to feed their young when it gets dark. Peter knows that it has not yet been possible to film shearwaters in their burrows.
I've been on all of the shearwater islands in the Chagos Archipelago, and I have never seen such an abundance of tropical shearwaters. That's the rarer of the two. So for me, this is a wonderful experience, and it's a great find.
Early in the morning, frigate birds and other seabirds circle over the island. Researchers here on these remote islands have discovered how important they are for the entire ecosystem.
Guano smells terrible, but for coral reefs, this bird excrement is vital. It evidently has exactly the right nutrient composition. The natural fertilizer strengthens the reef.
Guano is gradually washed into the sea, and there the coral reefs benefit from the constant flow. The reefs off the breeding islands are healthier and richer in fish. Bird guano helps corals, a significant and surprising discovery made by researchers on the remote Chagos Islands.
This is a perfect circle of seabirds going hundreds of kilometres out into the ocean, bringing food back onto the island for themselves and for their youngs. Some of the food gets dropped and decomposes, and that puts nutrients into the soil. Tons of guano getting put onto the island over the course of the breeding seasons for these birds, and then it's all getting washed slowly, or most of it's getting washed slowly, back into the lagoons and into the ocean, which is making the reefs around these islands much, much more healthy than those around islands without seabirds.
But these are also found in the Chagos Archipelago, islands where almost no birds breed. The explanation lies in the past, because the atolls have had a checkered history. In 1502, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama set off on his second expedition to India. He was very likely the first European to see the Chagos Archipelago. The islands were completely uninhabited at that time. Almost 200 years later, France brought large parts of the Indian Ocean under its rule, including the Chagos Archipelago. Diego Garcia, the largest island, was settled permanently for the first time. The French brought slaves to the islands and planted coconut plantations. The oil was in great demand. After Napoleon was defeated, Mauritius and the Chagos Islands became a British colony. Slavery was abolished, but work on the plantations continued. During the two world wars, military importance grew. The USA was interested in the strategically ideally placed islands between Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and Indonesia. Shortly before Mauritius became independent, the British separated out the Chagos Archipelago and founded the British Indian Ocean Territory. People had lived on Diego Garcia for almost 200 years, but in the mid-1960s, Great Britain leased the island to the USA, which built a military base here. About 2,000 inhabitants were displaced. Many ended up in the slums of Mauritius. Some are still fighting to return today. For the researchers, it's a strange feeling to go ashore here again. The first coconut plantations were established on Egmont Atoll in the 18th century. They were abandoned again as early as the 1930s, but traces of them are still evident today.
It certainly looks like a wonderful, idyllic tropical island that should be a holiday resort. But I think if you look closer, from a biologist's point of view, there are some parts missing of a beautiful island, of a perfectly environmentally sound island. There was only one species of tree we saw in the 3 or 4 kilometres of coastline, and that was coconut. There was no sound of calling seabirds, and there was certainly no smell of seabird guano.
Coconut palms are also part of the natural vegetation. Usually they would grow at the coast and strengthen the soil with their roots. Other trees ought to be growing in the interior of the island, but they have completely disappeared. Together with the seafarers and workers, rats also came ashore. Conditions for them were absolutely ideal. As on so many other islands, they preyed on the bird colonies. Ground nesting birds were helpless against the newcomers. Eggs and chicks had no chance. Rats and coconut palms, a deadly combination for the indigenous fauna and flora in the Chagos Archipelago.
There's probably 2 reasons why this is happening. The first is coconuts drop their fronds onto the ground underneath them and drop their nuts on the ground underneath them, and it forms a really dense canopy underneath that gives very few chances for any nuts and seeds and seedlings to come up through. They close the light out and they close the cover off on the ground. And the other one is the rats. Any seeds that may come here, the rats are probably eating anyway. And we have a term for this in the Chagos. We call this coconut chaos.
There's one creature that has managed to survive here, however. Its traces can be found everywhere in the undergrowth of the former plantations. Broken open coconuts. The researchers want to find the culprit. Rats and seabirds can't do it. Something else is responsible, namely the so-called palm thief, also known as the robber crab. It's the biggest terrestrial crab in the world.
A crazy creature. This one already looks huge, but it's still quite small. They live to be 90 years old and get to be twice as big as this.
A fully grown coconut crab weighs up to 4 kilograms. Its legs can reach a span of almost 1 meter. On the remote Chagos Islands, the robber crab has no enemies, but things are different in other parts of the world.
They're big and they're beautiful, but unfortunately for coconut crabs, they're slow and they're edible. Throughout their global range, particularly on continental areas, they're now extinct. And it's only on these remote tropical islands where they are still surviving in any viable population.
There's hardly any other place where the population is as dense as it is on the uninhabited Chagos Islands. Coconuts are their favorite food. On the bird islands, they also occasionally capture eggs or a chick, but the crabs have never posed a danger to the seabird population. But no matter how remote the islands are, there's one sign of civilization everywhere: plastic. The most common are bottles and flip-flops.
We've never found two of one kind, but you wonder the story behind this particular flip-flop. We also find lots of fishing floats and line, so coming from fishing gear. And finally, one of the most abundant items is these bits of polystyrene, started in some kind of box or float and broken up into smaller and smaller pieces.
Heather has already found bottles from 18 countries here. She records how much plastic accumulates in a particular section, because the more of it there is, the bigger the problem for nature. For example, for the sea turtles that lay their eggs on the beach.
Turtles are particularly vulnerable to plastic. When they hatch, the young emerge and they immediately start to forage, and they eat anything, and unfortunately now that includes plastic. So in juvenile turtles, in newly hatched turtles, and in adult turtles, we're seeing plastic in every part of their life cycle. And we're really starting to understand what effect that might have on them. You know, what happens to their nutrition, their survival, and their ability to thrive in a way that they have done for so long on this planet. But this new product, this relatively new thing that we've invented, is causing a real problem for turtles.
Large quantities of microplastics in the sand can raise its temperature, and that changes the ratio of female to male turtles. In some regions of the world, almost only females hatch from the eggs. Around the Chagos Archipelago, the underwater world is still relatively intact. Coral reefs play a crucial role in marine biodiversity. They are home to around a quarter of all species that live in the ocean. A reef is like a bustling city. The numerous inhabitants compete for living space, hunting, and mating grounds. The basis for this diversity is the enormously varied calcareous skeleton that the corals have built up over billions of years. The lionfish is currently spreading as an invasive species. Some reef dwellers form close partnerships, such as anemone fish and also giant clams. There's even a beauty salon. Grooming fish serve their customers here. Turtles and other species come by to be cleansed of parasites and dead skin. A mutually beneficial business.
Coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but are probably the most important ecosystems of all on our planet. They make a significant contribution to coastal protection. They're a source of food for many people, a livelihood for many people. And probably the most important characteristic of coral reefs is their extreme biodiversity. That is the tremendous variety of living organisms that occur there. And that is a great treasure for us.
The foundation of this diversity is a highly differentiated framework consisting of limestone. In the past, corals were thought to be plants or even stones, but they are in fact animals. Coral polyps are the master builders in a reef. They need sunlight and a subtenant. Single-cell algae live in the outer skin of the polyp, around 1 million per square centimetre, a wild cellular confusion and a true symbiosis. The algae produce sugar, providing energy for the coral, and in return they get protection and nutrients. This is how the coral polyp builds its calcareous skeleton. A reef grows up to 30 centimetres in height every year. Over time, a gigantic structure emerges, with only the uppermost layers consisting of living corals. Where there are builders, there also has to be a demolition squad. Parrotfish dispose of old, dead coral parts. They grind up the lime with their hard beaks, and it emerges from the other end as sand. The fish are a kind of health police for the reef. They feed on the algae that grow in and on the lime, and so stop rampant algae growth from taking over the reef.
This here is also digested coral. Researchers estimate that much of the sand we find on coral islands like this has previously passed through the stomach of a parrotfish. Measurements show that a large specimen can gnaw off up to 600 kilos of reef in a year and excrete the same amount again. That's about 1.5 kilos per day. That's a respectable amount.
Tropical coral reefs only occur in a narrow strip around the equator. They thrive best at temperatures of between 25 and 28 degrees, but corals almost everywhere are now under heat stress. The effects are especially pronounced on the Great Barrier Reef off the Australian coast. At over 2,000 kilometers long, it's the largest reef of all and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. During the extreme heat waves of the past few years, large areas of the reef were repeatedly damaged. The corals became bleached. The white color may look lovely at first glance, but it is a sign of decline. Why do corals turn white when it gets too warm for them? When temperatures rise, the algae go into overdrive, so to speak. They convert the sun's energy into oxygen and energy-rich sugar faster and faster. But at some point, the process jams. The algae become toxic, and the coral expels its symbionts. With the algae gone, the coral loses its color and bleaches, so the phenomenon is immediately visible. White corals are not necessarily dead. If the temperature sinks again fast enough, algae and color can return.
We know that coral reefs are a success model in the history of the Earth. These stony corals have existed for 250 million years with an almost unchanged structural plan. And we also know that these stony corals are extremely capable of regeneration. This means that when the stress subsides, they can recover very quickly. And that is the positive aspect of the situation. But that presupposes that we do reduce the stress.
But the heat waves are recurring faster and faster, and many reefs can't cope with that. So scientists all over the world are looking for ways to help the corals. Researchers are using a special approach at the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean. The King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, or KAUST, is located directly on the coast of Saudi Arabia. Uli Kunz wants to inspect the projects. The university is a world on its own. Its focus is on energy, agriculture, global change, and marine research. Thanks to surging revenues from the oil business, Saudi Arabia has plenty of money to invest in research and development. The university was only founded in 2009 and has been trying to attract renowned professors from all over the world ever since. Often successfully, there are researchers from over 60 countries working here. Christian Wild, professor of marine biology at the University of Bremen, has been cooperating with scientists at KAUST for many years. Marine biologists want to develop a kind of therapy for the corals, and they're using completely new approaches to do so. Everything in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is larger than life, including their research vessel. Raquel Peixoto came here from Brazil because the conditions at the Red Sea are ideal for her research.
The Red Sea has some conditions that are considered extreme for other corals and other places in the planet, including the temperature that is higher here. So we believe that the corals and their microbiomes, their microbes, evolved to adapt in such conditions. So we think that the most powerful probiotics, the most powerful medicine can be found here.
But even the Red Sea has repeated heat waves that also affect the coral reefs. In summer, the water temperatures can rise to 33 degrees centigrade.
We're trying to strengthen the coral reefs, especially the engineers of the reefs, the stony corals. And we're trying to help them resist climate change by adding important nutrients.
Off the coast, a little further out to sea, Christian Wild and Claudia Hill take the pulse of the coral reef, so to speak. What species live here? How healthy are the corals? Everything is minutely recorded. At first sight, the reef looks colourful and species-rich, but it's mostly anemones and soft corals. In some places, algae threaten to overgrow the corals. And there is one beneficiary. A damselfish, the white-belly damsel, grazes algal mats. The small fish keeps its territory clean. Another test. Uli Kunz places a piece of coral on the algae field, right on the fish's plate, so to speak. Time and again, the little fish clears it away. In the coral reef, there's a finely balanced equilibrium between countless species. But the actual builders of the reef, the hard corals, have become rare.
These reefs here are fighting back against their decline. So you see quite an impressive number of baby corals. Unfortunately, also right next to them, dead young corals that died 1, 2, or 3 years ago. But something is happening. The reef is still trying to restore the stony coral cover. But we have to give them the chance.
And that is exactly Raquel Peixoto's plan. Her research reef is not far from the university. There are marked off areas and measuring devices everywhere, almost like a coral clinic. The probiotics, that is, the microorganisms that she's applying, come from corals that can handle high temperatures particularly well. Medicine against extinction?
I don't think that corals as animals, individuals, will go extinct, but maybe the services that the ecosystem provides will be drastically affected. So, and this is something that may happen in the next 10 years, 20 years. So we really have to move very quickly to try to protect them now, because after they are gone, there's nothing we can effectively do.
Raquel wants to buy time so that the corals can adapt to climate change. But she won't know whether the treatment is working until the next heat wave at the earliest.
If it's a very severe event, when corals will be dying and bleaching pretty fast, you can visually compare them. So it's a real-time result. You go to the reef, you see if the probiotic inoculated ones are not bleaching compared to the ones that are being inoculated with placebo. If you don't see this very clear result, if the event is not so drastic, we have to take the samples back to the lab and run some analysis and stats to compare the results, and this may take some months.
And that's exactly what the scientists are trying to do in the aquarium first. Under controlled conditions, they can treat the corals with different probiotics. They're testing which medicine works in which dosage, quite similar to the development of medicines for humans. But it's more difficult because a coral is far more than a single animal.
This is a piece of an antler coral, and at the same time, it's an entire ecosystem. Algae live in this animal, producing oxygen and energy, and also lots of bacteria. Scientists call the whole thing a holobiont.
So the probiotics must benefit the entire holobiont, coral, algae, and the bacteria. Raquel Beixoto and Yusuf El Khaled warmed up the corals in the laboratory. Some they treated beforehand with probiotics, others with a placebo, that is, a solution without living bacteria. The result was clear.
We saw that all of the corals inoculated with probiotics survived and presented very high rates of the physiological metrics that we use, the proxies. And corals inoculated with placebo either died, 40% of them, or presented very low rates of these physiological proxies, so indicating that they were either dying or very sick.
The medicine works in the laboratory, but what about in the open sea? Do the probiotics get too diluted in the water? And how can the remoter regions even be reached? Raquel is working on solutions. She's just installed a fully automated system in her research reef. The corals are sprayed with the solution at predetermined times. So divers don't have to do it by hand anymore.
We are inspired by other types of applications. For example, if there is an oil spill, the dispersants can be thrown from helicopters or drones. So this is one possibility, that we are now developing bacterial pills with the probiotics, and they act as nicotine patches that slowly release probiotics in the water, so we could throw them on the coral reefs. We can also use ROVs. We can have automated robots that can go and deploy the pills.
But there's not much time left. As the temperatures rise, more and more reefs will disappear. In the evening, the researchers go out again. When darkness falls, the metabolism of the corals changes, as does the reef's entire symbiotic community.
If we only dive during the day, we miss an incredible amount, because especially in the coral reef, many animals only come out of their hiding places after sunset to feed, and if possible, not to be eaten themselves.
Underwater, an entirely different world awaits the divers. Fish have to sleep too, but as they have no eyelids, their eyes stay open. There are new discoveries everywhere. The gorgon's head is a brittle star. At night it catches plankton with its arms, but in the torchlight it immediately curls up. Nocturnal reef dwellers avoid light as much as possible. The Spanish dancer is a nudibranch or sea slug. It owes its name to its flowing movements and bright red color. While Uli Kunz explores the underwater world, the researchers begin their measurements. During the day, they marked the specific corals they want to study. The so-called PAM fluorometer sends flashes of light into the coral tissue and then measures photosynthesis, the ability to produce oxygen. For the scientists, this is an indicator of the coral's health. Under blue light, a very special phenomenon becomes visible. Corals and other organisms glow in bright fluorescent colors. It's a protective mechanism for the corals against UV light. They convert the energy-rich light into greenish or reddish radiation. At least, this is part of the explanation. The actual function of fluorescent colors is still not fully understood. Under cover of darkness, the moray eel goes hunting. A dangerous place to sleep. Eat or be eaten. In the reef, it's the same as with the lions in the Serengeti. The next morning, the researchers travel north up the coast. From the university, they head towards Yanbu, a place said to have especially pristine reefs. On the way, they encounter dromedaries, one-humped camels. The animals are perfectly adapted to the desert climate. They roam around like wild animals, but all dromedaries have an owner. Traditional lifestyle and the modern world lie cheek by jowl here. In the distance are refineries. Saudi Arabia owes its wealth to oil. A tiny part of the profits from the oil business finances the search for solutions against coral die-off. Dolphins romp about near the reef. They're sleeping. As marine mammals have to breathe regularly, they only sleep with one half of their brain at a time. The other half stays awake and coordinates their swimming movements. Christian Wild is also looking for a way to strengthen the corals. He doesn't rely on probiotics, but on nutrients and other substances. But first, he has to analyze the coral's metabolism in detail. The chamber is now a closed system. This enables measurements and therapy trials to be carried out. In the Red Sea, dolphins are frequently observed rubbing themselves against certain corals. Studies have shown that these corals actually contain antibacterial agents, a very effective skincare method for them. The marine biologists take samples regularly. Before they start treatment, they have to gather as much data for analysis as possible.
In the next step, we will add certain nutrients like nitrate and phosphate. We want to add iron and manganese. We also want to test hydrogen and oxygen concentrations in order finally to understand how these reef communities react to the addition of all these substances, in the hope that we can prevent or at least mitigate coral bleaching.
Whether it's probiotic inoculation, the breeding of especially resistant coral polyps, or therapy with nutrients, all these are interventions in nature. There may be risks, but the risk of doing nothing, just standing by and watching the changes take place, is even greater.
I don't think probiotics are like the solution to save the reef. I think the solution is mitigation of CO2 emissions, is to mitigate local stressors and to work towards solving the cause of this problem. But I think that the probiotics can buy coral sometime, and eventually this can also be very helpful in nurseries for restoration projects, because maybe probiotics will help these corals, will make them grow faster, and will also provide more resilient colonies that will be outplanted and actually survive.
Back to the Chagos Archipelago. Here, researchers are investigating what healthy reefs should look like. But no matter how remote the region is, the water temperature is rising here too. Many corals have died during the heat waves of recent years. But the studies after the last big bleaching event give reason for hope.
What we did find in the period after that was that the coral reefs did recover, and they recovered quicker and better than other places. And that was because there was no other pressures. They're not stressed by pollution, they're not stressed by sediments, they're not stressed by fishing. They're able to recover naturally, quickly and thoroughly.
The fewer the stress factors, the more resilient the coral reefs. The research team can only make these and many other discoveries where the underwater world is still intact. Their findings benefit us all, because coral reefs are the foundation of diversity in the sea, the basis of life for countless animal species, and ultimately also for us humans.